Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today, we'll be discussing the bizarre circumstances surrounding a woman gone missing during a trip to Pennsylvania with her husband. As the search for her commenced, some of the last sightings of the now missing woman seemed questionable, generating confusion for investigators and family alike. And with so many pieces of this puzzle not fitting, the reason for her absence became more and more difficult to pin down. Today's episode is part 1 of the disappearance of Judy Smith. Judith Smith, better known as Judy, was born and raised on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in a town called Orleans. She lived with her parents who owned a small diner, along with her 2 siblings, one of which was actually her twin brother and the other a younger brother. According to Michael Sokolov's reporting for the Philadelphia Inquirer, Judy was actually married for a very short time just out of high school, but that marriage didn't last very long. Then, sometime later, Judy met and married her second husband, Charles Bradford. The couple had 2 children, a son, Craig, and a daughter, Amy. Unfortunately, though, that marriage didn't work out either, and after the couple split, Judy was left to raise the 2 young children on her own. She had a wonderful relationship with her children, though, and was an incredibly devoted mother. Her kids adored her and had said that she was, quote, a heroic single mother who worked, put herself through nursing school, bought a house, and raised 2 children with little outside support, end quote. Judy was a self-reliant woman who spent a long time alone as a single mom, and her kids were always her number 1 priority. It had also been mentioned in that statement from her children that she'd put herself through nursing school, and she did graduate and secured a job as a home health nurse. She also purchased a home in Boston where she went on to raise her children. Over the years, Judy became a well-traveled woman. She'd been to numerous places across the United States, and later on in life, when her kids were older, she'd even backpacked across several countries with them, which included Spain, Italy, and France. It's reported that she'd even taken a trip to Thailand alone. I mean, this woman didn't really seem to be afraid of anything. She absolutely loved traveling. Even when she wasn't adding pins to her map of places she'd been, she was super outdoorsy and spent a lot of her time hiking and participating in extracurricular activities that involved being outside in some capacity or another. In terms of how Judy was as a person and kind of what her personality was like, she'd been described as sweet and kind-hearted as well as pragmatic. According to an article in the Philadelphia City paper, Judy was described as having a, quote, wonderful personality and was a very practical person too, end quote. But there was this other side to her that was just super freaking honest. She seemed to value honesty immensely, and she wouldn't pull punches regarding her feelings on, well, really anything for that matter, even if it might hurt others' feelings. But honesty is the best policy, so I can see where she's coming from on that one. But anyway, after quite a few years of Judy being completely independent and keeping all of her focus on her children and her career, sometime between 1986 and 1987, she actually ended up meeting a man named Jeffrey Smith, who would later become her 3rd husband. I had also mentioned before that Judy was a home health nurse, and that's actually how she met Jeff. She'd been caring for his father, who was sick at the time. Jeff, on the other hand, was a lawyer who specialized in healthcare and pharmaceutical law, and he was a partner at a law firm in the greater Boston area. Jeff and Judy hit it off, and the couple began dating. They were together for about 7 years after they'd met, with the 2 living their own separate lives, meaning like they each had their own houses and jobs and they hadn't really mixed their lives together fully just yet. However, come the early 90s, roughly around 93 or 94, the couple decided to move in together. They moved into Jeff's home in Newton, Massachusetts, even though Judy had owned a home in the Mission Hill neighborhood of Boston. I'm not entirely sure why they chose to move to Newton and into Jeff's home instead of Judy's, but either way, after 3 additional years of dating and now living together, Jeff and Judy decided to wed. The happy couple was married in November of 1996 when Judy was 50 years old and Jeff was 52. Oh, and I did just want to mention before we move forward that Jeff also had a daughter from a previous marriage who, oddly enough, was also named Judith. As far as I can tell, it seems as though the kids each liked their respective step-parents and the relationship within the family was pretty good.
That's just kind of weird.
It is a little strange. Like, imagine, like, oh, Judy my wife, Judy my daughter. Meet, hello. All right, so now let's fast forward about 5 months after the couple got married, and the two were planning a little mini getaway. During the dates of April 9th through the 11th of 1997, Jeff was going to be attending the Northeast Pharmaceutical Conference in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Judy, being the travel lover that she was, planned to tag along to visit the city while her husband attended the conference. So, on Wednesday, April 9th, 1997, the couple hopped into a taxi and made their way to Boston Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts, to catch their 1:30 or 3:30 flight to Philadelphia. I have seen it reported both ways, but either way, it was just an afternoon flight. However, once the couple arrived at the airport, Judy realized she'd forgotten something that was going to throw a huge wrench into their afternoon. She'd forgotten her ID at home. And back in 1997, you were required to have a valid photo ID to get on an airplane. Due to this slight mishap, Judy said she was going to head back home and grab her ID, and she'd just take a later flight to Philly. She told Jeff to take his early afternoon flight, and she'd meet him in the city later. Jeff wasn't overly thrilled that they were going to be traveling separately, but ultimately he obliged, and I have seen it mentioned that he had a meeting that day, so this could be why he decided to go to Philadelphia and not miss his meeting over the whole forgotten ID issue. So Jeff hopped onto his flight, and simultaneously, Judy got onto a bus to head back to their home in Newton to grab her identification. It's reported that Judy did make it home, she picked up her ID, made her way back to the airport, and was able to board a 7:30 flight to Philadelphia. Her flight landed at the airport in Pennsylvania around 9 p.m.
I already have questions.
Okay.
I'm wondering, was the ID removed on purpose? Did Jeff remove it and she just thought it was in her purse? Did she purposefully leave it behind? Why would your ID be outside of your purse or your wallet?
I have the exact same question, and the thing that popped into my mind was she's a well-traveled woman.
Right, she's not going to forget this.
She knows, exactly. So I'm like, that's such an odd thing to forget, unless...
It was done purposefully?
Either it could have been done purposefully, or sometimes, like, I know I've done it on an occasion or two, where it's like you took it out because you needed it for something. Like, say you had to put something in online, like I know it's 1997, there were computers, but it's different now. But say you needed to input something online or
like
whatever.
A license number or something?
Yeah, so say you took it out of your wallet and you were looking at it, using it for something, or maybe you were on the phone and
or maybe
you needed
a change
to grab
of purse
it.
Or wallet.
Yeah, exactly. So it could just totally be like, it could mean nothing
oversight.
Or it could mean something. Yeah, it could have just have been a complete and total accident, or it could be more along the lines of what you were saying of, was this done on purpose?
Yeah, it certainly could be an oversight, but to me, it seems strange.
All right, we're going to add it to the questions pile. So, after she got off the plane and grabbed her luggage, she made her way to the DoubleTree Hotel in Center City, Pennsylvania, where she and Jeff had booked a room, and it's reported that she arrived there roughly around 10 p.m. that same night. Funny enough, Jeff pretty much ran into Judy as she was checking in, so he waited as she finished up her check-in process, and then they'd head up to their room together. Also, something important to note is that when Judy saw Jeff, she actually handed him like a bouquet of flowers for like the whole mishap earlier in the day with her ID. I guess like this was her way of saying she was sorry.
I'd rather have a pizza.
It's funny you say that because I'm pretty sure I read that they got pizza for dinner instead.
Oh, no shit.
So maybe it was flowers and pizza. Who knows? But
yeah,
I thought that was a little strange. I was like, I wouldn't think to bring flowers to you to apologize. But who knows? I mean, that's a relationship. If that's what they did, sure.
Maybe
that's
he
fine.
had a favorite flower.
Maybe, yeah. But I just thought it was interesting.
Horticulture.
Hey, maybe. But after this quick exchange at the front desk, the couple went back up to their room, spent a little bit of time chatting, and then went to bed. Then, the next morning, now April 10th, Jeff left the room to grab some breakfast and then came back as Judy was about to hop into the shower. He told his new wife that she should head downstairs and grab breakfast herself before she left to embark on her adventures for the day. I guess the hotel had this like big continental breakfast set up, and he probably wanted her to have a full stomach for fuel for the day she had planned. She'd discussed her plans for the day with Jeff and let him know that she was going to be having a day full of sightseeing throughout the city. She was planning to take a tour bus around Philly and had plans to go to Independence Hall and to see the Liberty Bell. The couple also chatted about what they were going to be doing that night after the conference was done for the day and once Judy returned back from sightseeing. They were going to be meeting back up at the DoubleTree Hotel around 5 p.m. to make it to their evening plans. which I have seen reported as either like a mixer type get-together for the conference Jeff was attending, or they may have also been planning to have dinner with friends who were from North Jersey. I'm not sure which is more accurate in regards to when it was planned. I do know they did have plans to do both during their stay there, but it's a little wishy-washy on the exact plans they had for that Thursday night. But regardless of all the specifics, they set 5 p.m. as the time to meet back at the hotel and then head on their way. Everything seemed completely normal, and Jeff said goodbye to his wife, left their hotel room, and headed towards the conference that day where he'd be moderating a discussion panel. Meanwhile, Judy got dressed in a pair of blue jeans, white sneakers, and a dark-colored jacket. But before she walked out the door, she slung her trusty red backpack over her shoulder, and then she left the room. And I'm not kidding when I say her trusty red backpack. According to Michael Sokolov's reporting in the Philadelphia Inquirer, she called her red backpack, quote, the Red Wonder. And you can actually see this backpack in like every picture of her. There's always this bright red strap hanging over her shoulder. She was an avid traveler, loved hiking, and had backpacked across multiple countries. Clearly, this was her go-to travel companion.
I've always wanted to have like that item that is mine throughout all of life.
Yeah.
But I still haven't found it.
I feel like your wallet's good. Oh,
besides my wife.
Stop. Thanks, babe.
My wallet is good, but you don't see the wallet in pictures.
No, exactly. That's true. But it's like, let me actually send you one right now so you can see what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'm into watches now. I would like to have a watch that's on my wrist, 95% of the time. And
every photo anyone sees of you, they're like, oh, there's John and his watch.
There's the Marathon G-SAR Wonder.
Yeah, that one. All right, let me send you a picture of Judy here. See what I mean? She's got those red straps over her shoulder in like every photo of her.
The Red Wonder.
Yes, exactly. That's why she called it that.
I wonder what brand it was.
If I had to guess, JanSport.
I would say JanSport or maybe LL Bean.
Yep, that was going to be my next guess. All right, let's get back to the story. Things seemed to be totally fine throughout the day, at least for Jeff, with him completing his day at the conference. Once 5 p.m. rolled around, he made his way to the hotel room in the DoubleTree, but arrived before Judy did that evening. He waited a little while for her, even though it was out of the ordinary for her to be late, but at first he wasn't overly concerned. But then 5:30 came and went. Then 6:30 passed, and there was still no sign of Judy. At this point, Jeff couldn't wait any longer, and he knew something was up. There's no way Judy just wouldn't show. It didn't make sense. So after about an hour and a half to roughly 2 hours of waiting, he called police to report his wife missing. And along with that phone call, he also rang Judy's kids, Craig and Amy, and let them know that something was going on and he didn't know where Judy was.
So, being 97, it's like just before cell phones became commonplace. I assume she probably didn't have one.
I don't think so, but I'm not entirely sure.
No comment of a beeper?
Ooh, no, I didn't see anything about a pager.
Okay.
Good point. Good thing to think about, but
especially if she's like well-traveled, she...
Yeah.
I guess it could go both ways. Like as technology's advancing, she may want to have that available to her. That way if she has to make a call, sure, she has the ability to do so.
Yep.
But being well-traveled, she may feel as though she doesn't need it.
Yeah, she's like, you know what? I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I'm confident. I'm going to get back by 5. Like,
I traveled the hills of Thailand by myself.
Yep.
Philly ain't nothing.
Exactly. I don't need a beeper in Philly. I'm good.
Right.
Who knows? But yeah. So I will say, just based on some early reporting on this case, it didn't seem like police took the whole thing very seriously at first, with authorities providing Jeff with responses like, oh, it's just a big city, she'll turn up sooner. Oh, she's an adult, blah, blah, blah. You know the usual, right?
I know the usual, but at the same time, them saying, oh, it's a big city, she'll turn up, that's also a reason to be like, oh, it's a big city.
We should probably fucking check on her.
Shit happens in big cities, you know, you got gangs, you got just random acts of violence.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know what Philadelphia was like back then, but like it's still, at the end of the day, it's a big city.
Late 90s, you're talking gangster rap. Mm-hmm. East Coast versus West Coast rivalry going on.
True, yeah.
So I wouldn't say, Philly, Baltimore, New York City, the Bronx, all of these places are not like the best place to be traveling alone in during the late 90s. So I think there should be some cause for concern.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's also going back to that like 70s, 80s, 90s mindset of police where it's like, she's an adult, she can do whatever the hell she wants.
Also, too, if it's a big city, think of all the other stuff police are dealing with at the time.
Exactly.
It's
Is this a priority right now?
My wife hasn't shown up in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Is it? Like, all right, we hear you. We'll keep an eye out.
Yeah.
We're not going to
jump right on this.
Ring all the bells and whistles and stuff and be like, hey, everybody gotta go out and search for this lady.
Yep, exactly.
But they're acknowledging that they understand she hasn't returned.
But there could be another reason.
But she may turn up sooner or later.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jeff, on the other hand, was not going to sit idly by when he knew something had to be very wrong. So he went out searching the same route Judy had taken that day. Remember, she was taking that tour bus. According to an article in the Philadelphia City paper, quote, Jeffrey hailed a cab and had the driver follow the route of SEPTA's flash service, which he knew Judy planned to use that day. I had him drive it for about 5 miles an hour, he recalled with a thin smile. Drove him crazy with all the traffic behind us. I'm not sure what I expected to see, but that's what I did, end quote.
I don't know how I feel about the thin smile comment. This is obviously somebody interviewing him for some type of piece.
Correct.
Regarding his wife's disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't say that if I was searching for my wife, who's clearly still missing, if they're writing an article on it and they're interviewing him, I wouldn't be like, I had him drive 5 miles an hour.
I smile when I'm uncomfortable. I laugh when I'm uncomfortable. So, for all you know, the reporter is writing like, oh, I noticed this, but Jeff could just be uncomfortable. So I wouldn't super read into it just yet.
These are just,
initial thoughts.
Initial thoughts that stick out to me.
I get it.
But also on the other hand of it, like with the police not really taking it super seriously to begin with. I mean, Jeff has now been with her for almost, 10 years?
Yes. Yep.
If this is out of the ordinary, I'm sure he has some idea.
Of like how she is as a person. Would this be something she would normally do? If not, like he's concerned for a reason.
Yeah.
All right. So on top of that, it's also mentioned in the same article, as well as multiple other publications, that Jeff had reached out to someone that worked at the pharmaceutical conference that he'd attended, and I guess that individual had some connections. And from what I can tell, this person reached out to some state representatives and even the mayor to let them know that authorities were not taking Jeff Smith's wife's disappearance seriously.
Funny how people in the pharmaceutical industry have connections to mayors.
Very interesting, yes. Well, I'll tell you, that was the kick in the booty the police needed. Because once political heads got involved, authorities were out in the city immediately looking for Judy. They scoured the local area, checked hospitals, and canvassed and talked to as many people as they could to see if anyone had now seen the missing woman.
Doesn't that piss you off?
Oh, of course it pisses me off.
If this was just some random Joe Schmo that came in and was like, hey, my wife hasn't turned up. We just came here on vacation. She's been gone for like 2 hours.
Yep.
It's not like her.
Yep.
They would have been like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But now that Jeff has connections to this person who has connections to these people, it's like, now they get the work done.
Exactly, yeah, and that's so frustrating. And there were a couple articles that kind of like elaborated on this whole situation, but I wasn't exactly sure like how much of it was true, how much of it was, kind of insinuating and whatever. So I don't know if Jeff was just like reaching out to this guy to be like, hey, I really need some help here because he knew this guy had connections, or if it was like, he's just calling all of his friends, like, you saw Judy, she was here at the conference, like, can you help me out? Can you help me out? Like, what do you think I should do? And then from there, this friend, like, didn't mention to Jeff that he had any connections, but went behind the scenes to do it. So I don't really know what happened.
I would assume that Jeff probably knew that this person had some type of connections. I mean, they're putting on this conference where Jeff is moderating something. It's the pharmaceutical industry. It's in a big city. The people putting it on probably run fundraisers.
Yeah.
And through fundraising, you make connections to different politicians. So I'm sure he knew that there was some type of connection there.
Yeah, but he maybe didn't say, like, I need you to reach out to state reps.
And he may not have known the extent of the connection between this essential coworker of his and the politicians that could actually enact change and force people to go out and look for his wife.
Yeah, exactly. So within the first few days and weeks of the search for Judy Smith, authorities found no confirmed sign of her in Philadelphia, but did receive a handful of calls from people in the area stating that they had seen Judy. From what I can tell, though, a lot of these sightings actually turned out to be a woman that looked oddly similar to Judy, and then another who had the same name as her, which doesn't surprise me, she does have a very common name. But the thing that was weird about this case as I was first researching it, though, had to do with the fact that there was, like, barely any information in the news about a missing woman in Philadelphia in April of 1997. It didn't seem like anyone in the press really latched onto the case up front, as I only saw one article from April when she'd first gone missing. But I did see an article with the Philadelphia City paper, though, and that stated that some other news outlets did report on the case back then. And sometimes I will say, like, newspapers.com doesn't always have, like, every publication. So there may be things that were reported that I just, unfortunately, don't have access to. But this article in the Philadelphia City paper stated, quote, "The Daily News reported Judy Smith's disappearance on April 12th and again on April 14th. An Inquirer article ran in between, and 2 local television stations aired the story as well," end quote. Either way, though, to me, just a handful of articles and a news station or 2 definitely is not a lot of coverage.
Yeah, especially when you have Jeff having this connection to, one of his coworkers who actually has some type of connection to the mayor or whatever politician.
Yep.
And that connection is strong enough to get a search going.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that, unless it was just like this person had the mayor's ear and the mayor just made a quick call and said, hey, you need to look into this. And it wasn't like a super friendly, reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, yep.
So he wasn't like going to start running to the news and being like, hey, you need to report on this.
Yeah, blast this out, blah, blah, blah.
So.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. But I will say, the flurry in the news changes a lot later on. But before we get into all of that, I want to stick to where we are in the timeline so far.
Does it increase because of political pressure?
No, it doesn't seem that way. It seems like someone heard about the story and they were like, wow, this is really intriguing, and things kind of exploded from there.
So we can pretty much put aside for now any other type of political connection. This only got the ball rolling in the search for her and doesn't really follow through going forward into media coverage and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
I don't think so at all. I don't think anything political continues on in this case.
I had one side question.
Absolutely, go for it.
You had said that Jeff was supposed to be moderating at this event.
Mm-hmm.
Did he indeed moderate it?
He did, yes.
So he did it.
From what I understand, he was absolutely at the conference this day.
Okay.
So just a minute ago, I mentioned that Jeff had called Judy's 2 children. Well, Craig, who was 26 at the time, and Amy, who was 24, both came down to Philadelphia after they'd gotten that call so they, too, could assist in the search for their mother. Jeff, along with Judy's kids, stayed in the Philadelphia area for several weeks in April to assist in the search. But unfortunately, Judy was nowhere to be found, and the lack of leads set the family on their way back to Massachusetts just a short time later.
I'm probably getting ahead of myself as far as like investigations go, but I mean, if she was going to Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell, these must have some type of surveillance.
That's a really good point. I don't think I have seen really anything about surveillance. I think that was like
these are government monuments, essentially.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
They have to have surveillance. They have to have security, people checking, tickets or something.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything about surveillance in any of these places regarding this case. That's a good point, though.
And this is a fairly publicized case, too.
Yeah, but maybe that's something that police didn't want to release.
Okay.
Very good question, though.
Well, it'd be good for like a timeline going forward. And again, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but like they were like, oh, we saw her at Independence Hall at,
so-and-so a time. Yeah.
So.
Yep. No, that's a really great question, and I wish I knew more.
Well, we'll save it for later.
Yes, we will. All right. So once Jeff got home to Massachusetts, he did not stop pushing to find his wife, despite his growing frustration with law enforcement and their lack of a response to his requests. So, while he waited for answers and help from authorities, he took the time to mail out thousands of missing persons flyers and even hired multiple private investigators, who unfortunately didn't come up with anything more than what Philadelphia PD already had. Also, according to the Unsolved Mysteries episode on this case, the flyers that were sent out by Jeff were mailed to hospitals and medical examiners' offices all over the entire east coast of the United States. So, literally from the top in Maine all the way down to Florida.
Yeah, that's good thinking if
Absolutely.
She was a doe and
Yes.
hadn't been identified.
Yep. Really great thought process in his mind. And I have to think his background as a lawyer has probably helped him in a lot of this.
Right.
Also, I mentioned Jeff's frustrations with law enforcement, and I wanted to elaborate on that a bit more. So, a couple things have been mentioned in terms of this, and I can't say for sure how much is actually accurate or just miscommunication, but either way, it's reported that the Philadelphia PD supposedly completely refused, to bring the FBI into their investigation despite Jeff's pleading. Seems as though the reason for that was because the PD didn't know if there was evidence of any sort of crime having occurred. But I would think if someone went missing out of the state that they lived in, the FBI would have jurisdiction over that. But I don't know, maybe I just watch too much Criminal Minds and that's not how it works in real life?
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily how it would work. I mean, you have a last confirmed sighting in Philadelphia. The two adults parted ways, and she is just now missing. There's no crime
having occurred that you know of.
Right.
I mean, I get it. I think it's just like
if anything, you'd bring in state police because it's Philadelphia, but it could range throughout multiple cities in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, yep.
And then I think once you bring in, you have Philadelphia PD involved, they bring in Pennsylvania State Police, then it would be on Pennsylvania State Police to bring in a greater agency.
If they felt as though they needed it. So it seems as though Jeff was saying, get the frickin' FBI in here. I feel like we need them. And authorities were like, I get that it's your wife. I get that you're worried. I get that you're feeling this way. But in terms of our policies, we're going to give you a hard no on that until we can confirm that they're actually needed here.
Right. You need to have some evidence of foul play, I would assume, in order to bring in, the FBI.
Because, I mean, as much as it sucks to say, and it's always said by authorities, she's an adult. She can leave if she wants to. Right.
And there's no evidence of foul play at the time. There's, no phone call made under duress where she called one of her children or, her husband and sounded like she was in trouble.
Yep. You don't know anything about surveillance like you mentioned. Was there surveillance where maybe she was abducted, something like that? You don't know any of that.
Right.
So
you would have to start tracking her movements. If she paid cash, of course, that's going to be harder. But if she had bought a ticket onto this tour bus and then the tour bus had X amount of stops, you got to go to each stop. You got to talk to the people that were working there on that day and start,
really
filling
piecing
in the gaps.
Together the timeline of where and when she could have been once she stepped foot out of the Doubletree Hotel that day.
Right, because a missing 50-year-old woman could be missing for any number of reasons.
Yep, absolutely. Another frustration Jeff had that was reported had to do with the fact that Philadelphia police allegedly told Jeff that they were going to be adding Judy's information to the National Crime Information Center database, also known as NCIC. And it was said that they were going to be doing this immediately after she went missing, but come to find out, that supposedly didn't happen until about a month after Judy had vanished. I mean, I would think that having her information in there from the second she went missing, especially if she'd crossed state lines, I know I just keep harping on that, but I think that could have been huge in finding her.
Yeah, it's also strange that it would take that long to enter her, because generally when you take a missing persons report, one of the first things you do, whether it's, waiting until the next morning to see if they return or whatever, is you enter them into NCIC. That way, if another agency were to ever make contact with that person and identify them, whether it be through, running their name and date of birth or running a driver's license, you get a hit back saying, hey, this person is entered as missing. And then you can kind of go forward with
say
contacting the other PD, saying, hey, we have Judy here. What's the deal?
Could she have been arrested, or was she pulled over, or say she was in a taxi and the taxi got pulled over and they recognized her, something like that. That would be what would prompt another agency to say, oh, we now got this missing person uploaded to NCIC. We're supposed to be keeping an eye out for her. They see her and then they can say they found her. Is that kind of along the lines of how it would work?
Well, I'm not sure what you meant by taxi. If the taxi person recognized that she had been entered missing and then they call the police?
No, what I'm saying is, say I don't know, taxis are drivers. They can get pulled over, right? Say a taxi gets pulled over. I'm saying that because she's not going to be driving. She doesn't have her car. She's in Philadelphia.
Yeah, but only drivers have a obligation to identify themselves. Maybe different in Pennsylvania at the time, but she wouldn't have to identify herself because she did nothing wrong. She's not part of an investigation at that point.
Okay, so say they noticed, wouldn't they put her picture on NCIC? What if the officer was like, oh, I know her. She's in the back of this taxi right now.
Yeah, it depends how good the communication is with
True.
PPD or Philadelphia Police Department and these other agencies, because if it took a month to enter her into NCIC, I mean, that's a long time past, but generally say if they did it appropriately, they take the missing persons report, say they have to wait, however long, maybe they want to wait until the next morning to see if she comes home. Okay, fine. Once it's entered into NCIC, then that hits everybody else. The person that monitors NCIC, whether it be a dispatcher or an officer or some type of administrator, receives a notification saying, hey, this person's missing. And if they choose to disseminate that information down the line, then other people will probably know about it. But if
are they not required to then?
How many times are people required to do things and they don't do them?
This is very true. I feel like this is something we talk about all the time, where it's people just cannot do their jobs right, where it's you're supposed to be doing this. Right. This is a part of your job description. And then, something messed up could happen and then
Yes, but getting her entered into NCIC immediately is a great benefit for the investigation because
Agreed, yeah.
obviously if she comes in contact with another PD and they identify her and they run her, they'll get that hit back saying that she's entered as missing. But also say something had happened to her where she's like a gunshot victim.
Yeah.
You know, police have to be called to hospitals when they admit a gunshot wound victim, and then they'd identify her at the hospital.
Okay.
Oh, this is a missing person. This is why
no one
she
can
didn't
find her.
Right.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
interesting. There was something else, though, that was reported that I wanted to read for you. It's a statement, I guess, kind of like a statement in the Philadelphia City paper, and it's regarding potential miscommunication between Jeff and the Philadelphia PD here. So it says, quote, Smith says Ryan told him shortly after Judy's disappearance that her name and description had been entered into the National Computer System. Smith took him to mean the NCIC. But weeks later, Smith says he got a hint, he won't elaborate, that Judy was not in the NCIC system. To find out, he asked for a copy of her NCIC printout, but was given something altogether different. He then demanded that she be entered, and she was, the next day. There was a misunderstanding, says Ryan, who confirms that Judy wasn't entered until sometime in May. He opts, diplomatically perhaps, not to elaborate, end quote.
I'm not sure what other national database they would be referring to outside of NCIC for a missing person in particular.
Yeah, I just think it was really weird. I'm like, I get Jeff's frustration that I was like, okay, but we're also humans. Sometimes mistakes happen, but like what kind of mistake could you have made there where it's like you are told by a potential victim's husband that he wants her in the national database? What other kind of database would there be?
I don't know. And I mean, we're talking 97 where the system is not as
sophisticated as it is today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And who knows what the process was back then. I mean,
Yeah.
Nowadays you can just go on, you log into the system and you can enter stuff in after it's been approved by, other people throughout the department.
Yep.
But back then, who knows? I don't think there should have been any type of miscommunication. And the fact that somebody from Philadelphia PD said that she was entered into a national database, but not NCIC, that's strange. I could understand if they had said entered into a state database.
But clearly he was focused on national attention
Right.
because he's sending these flyers across the East Coast. Like, that is what Jeff was focused on. He's like, I need to get it out there because she could essentially be anywhere.
Yeah, it sounds like whoever was saying that she was entered into a national database was probably lying to try and cover their tracks.
I mean, hey, who knows? It seems like it had a rocky start. So
Or let's say, they weren't lying. They misunderstood the question.
yeah, that sounds about right.
They made a mistake.
Yeah, well, anyway, by July of 1997, 3 long months after Judy had disappeared, things really began to heat up in her case again, at least in the press. Prior to this, authorities had apparently stopped receiving calls for a while, and I think this is when they really blasted out the information to the media and asked for her case to be put out there to see if anyone might have seen her, if they had any idea where she was, and, obviously they're asking them to come forward with this media attention. So Judy was described for the public as 5 feet 2 inches tall, 140 pounds, with brown eyes and short chin-length light brown hair. She was also described as having 2 piercings in her left ear, as well as having a relatively large scar on her right leg below her knee that was said to be over 5 inches long. I've seen it reported that she had pretty bad arthritis in her knees, so I think that might have been where the scar came from. It was also stated in the press that Julie was a newlywed and wore both her engagement ring, which was described as a pear-shaped diamond, as well as a silver wedding band. More sightings seem to be reported on at this point, but it's unclear if investigators received those leads back in April or now in July, but either way, it's reported that the last confirmed sighting of Judy had been about a week after she went missing. There were quite a few different sightings mentioned in multiple publications, but overall, it's not really clear how many of them, if any, were in fact Judy.
So you're saying we have a confirmed sighting 1 week after her disappearance?
Yes, supposedly.
Do we know where that was or who had come forward?
We'll be getting there.
All right.
So there was one sighting in particular that I saw mentioned that was said to be from Deptford, New Jersey, at a Macy's store where a cashier said she saw Judy and she may have been disoriented and out of sorts when she was spotted there. At first I was like, geez, she's seen all the way in New Jersey? And then once I looked up the distance between Philadelphia and Deptford, I felt a little foolish because the towns are literally only a 30-minute drive apart. So it's not really out of the realm of possibility that she could have made her way there.
Also, it's good to note that she seemed disoriented and out of sorts.
Yes, absolutely. But then that kind of makes me wonder, too, how could she have made her way there without any other sightings of her? If she took a taxi, wouldn't the taxi driver have seen her? If she hitchhiked, could that person have come forward to say they'd given her a ride? But I haven't been able to nail down if there were any sightings like that authorities were able to, find out about.
Well, if she was disoriented and out of sorts, there's the possibility she could have been kidnapped and drugged, which would make her seem kind of out of it.
Yep.
I'd like to know what she was purchasing.
Yeah, that I'm not sure about. I don't even know if she bought anything. I think I saw one mention of maybe looking through the dresses, but I don't think she actually bought anything.
And she wasn't seen with anybody else, just by herself?
Yeah.
And was she still wearing her same clothes?
Not sure on that one, but there's a few more things I want to tell you. So,
all right.
There were a couple other supposed sightings of her as well. Another one also in New Jersey, but at a casino, and then a few others in Philadelphia. There was one commonality between a lot of these sightings, though, and that's that she was confused and not acting totally normal. But the thing I question is if any of these sightings were of that woman who supposedly looked just like Judy. Everything I've read about this other woman is that it was like uncanny how similar they looked, and even her son mistook this woman for her when he was helping search in Philadelphia. So had this woman made her way and this is the lady that's confused and acting odd. I'm not entirely sure, and it seems like a lot of these sightings are up in the air. Was it her? Was it not her? Was it the person with the same name? Was it the person that looked like her? I am not sure which one is the one that's confirmed as definitively being her.
So are you saying that they made contact with somebody that looked just like her?
Yes, they said it was super freaking weird how nearly identical these women looked, and it absolutely was not Judy Smith.
And they found that lady, they identified that lady, and it was not Judy.
Yes.
Was that lady ever out of sorts, or did she have any mental issues? Or...
I'm not sure. I think she might have been homeless. I am not positive.
Okay.
So that could go along with it. Maybe she was, using drugs, or maybe she, I don't know. She could have had a mental illness. There could have been anything that,
I think that mental illness goes hand in hand with homelessness most of the time. So.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so now, because of these sightings and the disturbing nature of the potential of Judy not being in her right mind, Jeff Smith seemed to be getting to a point where he was worried something really serious could have happened to his wife, and that may have been what led her to become disoriented, like it was stated within several of those sightings. I don't think there's been any definitive confirmation that any of them were definitely Judy, like we were just talking about, but wherever she was, based on the possibility that any of them could be legitimately her, Jeff felt it was possible she could have had amnesia or some sort of mental issue that put her in this state of confusion. Jeff stated, quote, "My concern is that people who claim to have observed her described her as being disoriented. The only thing that makes logical sense is that she suffered some kind of trauma and became disoriented," end quote.
Well, trauma, drug use, there are multiple different things that could cause somebody to be disoriented, and to really try and narrow it down to say, some type of trauma must have occurred. I wonder if he means physical trauma, emotional trauma, like she was tortured or something like that.
Well, I can give you a little more. So just based on additional comments made in the press and kind of how I've interpreted them, it seemed to me that Jeff was pretty set on amnesia. And the Elwood City Ledger reported something else he said in regards to that whole possibility. He stated, quote, "I have consulted psychoneurologists about what might happen. They said that in a rare event, some kind of blow could cause a situation like this, and she could be wandering around in a disoriented state. My hope is to publicize this nationally so that someone who may have seen her can help us find her. Her daughter and her son and I are very worried about her, and we just want to be reunited with her," end quote.
Well, if you think it's a blow to the head that was, performed by someone else, like an attack.
Yeah.
You'd think there would be some type of injury, and then she would end up making her way to the hospital, and then when she's clearly amnesic,
yeah,
they wouldn't release her. They would try to track down next of kin or family members or whatever.
I don't think there necessarily has to be an injury, though. What if she just fell? Like, what if she fell, slipped,
what I'm
whacked her
saying.
head, but it just had a bump and she was like, I don't need to go to the hospital, I'm fine.
That's what I'm saying. If it was like an attack or something, you'd think that she would make her way to the hospital. So
yeah.
now you're thinking, what are the odds that she would strike her head, but it not be serious enough for her to seek medical attention or to need medical attention, and then just forget about
her
a
life?
certain part of her life?
Yeah. See, it's weird, right?
Amnesia is like quicksand. When I was a kid, I thought it was going to be a much bigger problem than it is.
That is so true, honestly. Very, very good point.
Like, when you think of amnesia, I wouldn't think of her having like a mental lapse being because of amnesia and a blow to the head. I would think of it more as a mental illness, like an early onset dementia or something like that. Or it's like a drug-induced stupor.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I would think it's more along the lines of maybe she had some sort of mental break and now she's like forgetting things. Maybe she remembers certain aspects, but she forgets where she was before. She forgets who she was with or little things like that. And maybe it's progressively getting worse.
Yeah, like Memento.
Yes, exactly.
A movie you've seen.
Yes, a movie I've seen. Oh, I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah, and if she doesn't mark things down or whatever, she'll forget them. And sometimes even if she were to write it down.
And especially if this was just coming on too. Like if this is something she'd never experienced before.
Yes, I agree. I just think it's a stretch to think that she would suffer some type of blow, regardless of how it occurred, have it cause amnesia, and not have some type of injury outside of, an internal brain injury that would require some type of medical assistance.
I see what you're saying. I think I'm more along the lines as well of a psychological issue, not a blow to the head.
Psychological issue, a kidnapping, a drugging, something like that.
Agreed. So now, in terms of where investigators were at and what they believed might have happened, they did mention that they believed Judy was likely in another place entirely, whether that be another city within the state of Pennsylvania or another state in general. But they did confirm that her passport was not with her. So due to that, they were pretty sure she hadn't left the country. And ever since she disappeared, they'd also apparently been tracking her credit card, as she was said to have had that with her when she vanished. But as of July 1997, there were no recent transactions that they could trace. Therefore, they could not locate her with the credit card.
But she did have the credit card in her possession.
Correct.
So that would lead you to believe that if somebody was attempting to rob her, if somebody's robbing her and they're going to take her belongings, whether it be her rings, any cash she had on her, or her purse in general.
Yep. You would probably have seen a transaction on the card. Yeah.
They're the same type of person that would bleed everything dry out of that person's possession.
Well, yeah, I think
especially
of Sherry
in
Magaro. Yeah.
Right. Especially in 97 when
absolutely
you could just go and swipe the credit card and nobody would really
so much easier.
pay attention.
Okay, so now at this point, it seemed like authorities were asking one integral question in this case. And that was Judy Smith ever actually in Philadelphia in the first place?
Why are we asking this question?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? It's a very...
Was she not seen checking into the DoubleTree?
We're going to get there.
Because she got there before Jeff got out of the conference.
Mm-hmm.
And she had these flowers for him.
Mm-hmm.
Is this all some elaborate, weird story from Jeff? Which is why I asked if he was actually at
the conference. Yes. Okay. So I'm very curious how you're going to take all of this. But already I was kind of getting like a little bit of Virginia Douglas vibes from this case. And that's why I was saying that to you before we even recorded this. Like, it's
like a weird story from a husband.
Yeah. So it's a little strange, right? But I have very different opinions on this case. So let me kind of lay it all out for you.
All right. But I want to say, too, that makes you think again, like, back to the whole ID thing.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
The ID is huge for me in this case. I'll tell you right now. It's one of the biggest sticklers for me. So we'll get there.
That caught me right off the bat before even knowing anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this lady's well-traveled. How are you going to forget the ID?
Mm-hmm.
Did your husband purposely take it out of your wallet and leave it somewhere? Or did you not want to go and you left it somewhere? Who knows, but I'm intrigued.
There's a lot of questions.
I'm intrigued.
So in terms of this question that's being asked now, authorities were obviously looking into this. Locals were starting to wonder. The media was talking about it. It was kind of like the big question right now, right?
Well, you got to think, too. She has kids that are wondering about it.
Mm-hmm.
Kids have friends. They're also of the adult age where they're probably having their own relationships building, maybe a family.
Mm-hmm.
She has 2 ex-husbands. Who knows if they have a vested interest in this now?
Mm-hmm.
She has a lot of connections where people might be wondering, what the hell happened here?
Yes. Well, I will say regarding the ex-husbands, one was like in another country. I think he like completely deserted her. That was the one from high school or right out of high school. And then Charles Bradford, who was the kid's father, he just up and left and she raised them alone. So it doesn't seem like he was even involved in any way, shape, or form either.
Okay. Well, at least she has the kids in her corner wondering what the hell happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well as Jeff at this point anyway.
Yes. So the first thing I want to mention is that with police now asking this question, and of course they're side-eyeing Jeff. You know they are. There's no way that they're not. I mean, they wouldn't be asking this question if they weren't looking at him, right? Well, that kind of seemed to piss him off, and he had some comments to make about this theory early on, but as time continued to pass, he even went on to hire a media relations person to speak to the media in his place.
Well, just keep in the back of your mind that he is a lawyer.
Yes. For me, I was like, well, that kind of is probably really freaking smart to do. So, like, I don't fault him for that. I think that's probably a good idea.
Right. I mean, he's a lawyer. He now works in, like, pharmaceutical sales or something.
Well, it's pharmaceutical law. That's the type
Sure.
of law he was practicing, yeah.
So, I mean, think of all the connections that you have via media and the knowledge of the law that you have and public image.
Yep.
So,
I think he's making some smart decisions. I do have to say that.
yes.
Okay, but in terms of the theory of Judy potentially never being in Philadelphia, said media relations person, Sally Jackson, stated, quote, "When you start walking down that road, it just gets really frustrating. It's just one theory we never believed would be productive," end quote.
What, going after Jeff?
I think that's what that means, yes.
Okay.
I think that's what's being insinuated.
It's not productive to go after him because he didn't have any involvement?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Also, before Jeff had gotten this spokesperson, he did tell Michael Sokolov for the Philadelphia Inquirer, again, in terms of Judy not having been in Philadelphia at all, quote, "I'm not going to play that game. I know she was there. It's never been a concern to me. Are the police schmuck enough not to have checked the register? She signed her name at the desk," end quote.
Yeah, check the signature that I'm sure they still have file. Make sure it matches her handwriting.
Supposedly, she didn't actually have to sign a register at the front desk, so I'm not sure if there was like a miscommunication there, but it was reported later that supposedly guests in general didn't have to sign anything.
Okay, fine. But you would assume that this reservation was made for Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yes.
And that when she arrived later and he was still at the conference, she would be able to go up to the front desk and receive a key to at least get into the room.
Yes, exactly.
So
go through the check-in process.
Right. There had to be some type of sighting at the front desk. And there has to be some type of record where if somebody checked in to get a second key, somebody has to know about it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Okay, so let's elaborate a little bit more then, shall we? There were a few things that seemed to bring doubts into investigators' minds, and I think that might be why the question of her ever being there in the first place even began to, be asked by authorities. So, first of all, there was a comment about the couple's hotel room and what one investigator described it as looking like. The Philadelphia Inquirer reported, quote, "Sergeant Ann McGinley was one of the detectives to check the room the day the search began. She spotted a bag of pink curlers on the bathroom sink, but no makeup, hairbrushes, or cosmetics. There were some women's clothes in the dresser drawers and 2 dresses hanging in the closet. A mixed bouquet of flowers was in a vase on a table near the bed. When I travel," McGinley says, "I have all this stuff with me. Brushes, lotions, makeup, lipstick. I think most women are like that. But there wasn't any of that stuff in the room, which seems strange to me at first. But after talking with her kids, I found out she wasn't like that. She didn't really wear a lot of makeup or jewelry. She wasn't one to pamper herself. Just about everything she needed, she carried in that backpack," end quote.
So why the hell are there curlers there? I don't picture this lady with, chin-length hair curling her hair.
Hey, that's not necessarily true. A lot of people would use that for volume up on the top, so don't knock the curlers.
I don't know. I'm looking at these 2 pictures that you sent me of her.
Yeah.
I mean,
have you ever
she's
seen
got short hair. I don't picture her curling her hair.
John, we've talked about this before, and I think we have talked about this on the podcast before as well, where older women would do that kind of permed hairstyle, and it made them look older. Do you know what those older women do if they are not going to the salon? They use curlers, and they have shorter hair than Judy.
I don't know.
You're not allowed to comment on women's hair products. I'm sorry.
Fine, but I do understand, and I agree with this detective or this police officer's instinct of, hey, where is all this stuff? And I also think, okay, the Red Wonder, yeah, sure, it's carried around everywhere, but Is she going to keep her fucking toothpaste in there when she's traveling to the Liberty Bell?
Hey, I don't know.
Sure, she might travel with these things.
Yeah.
But when you get to the hotel, you unload them because why do you need to be traveling with them when you're going other places? What if you buy merchandise? What if you buy whatever? You want to have space to keep it in the bag, so...
I see what you're saying. I totally agree, and I can see why they would be a little bit skeptical.
I agree. And now, I was questionable about Jeff's story with the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
And now knowing more about the room and how there really weren't a lot of the women's products in there, even if she's not one to pamper herself.
I'm over here just like smirking to myself because I'm like, oh, you just wait. It gets so much more confusing.
It does seem strange.
Are you like completely ping-ponged back and forth already? Because I was.
Ping-ponged between what?
Like, WTF is going on? Is Jeff involved? Is Jeff not involved? Did Judy leave? Did Judy not even make it there? Like, what is going on?
I'm not ping-ponged between them all, but I'm wondering, like, there is a lot of information that can be gathered through an investigation that would answer these questions. And these may be some of the questions that we're left with by the end of it.
Yeah.
But if there's reason for the FBI to be involved, it may be people close to Judy that may be involved in her disappearance more so than it would be to say, oh, my wife's missing. We need to find her. It's like, well, now this guy's story's not adding up. And now, you know, his well-traveled wife forgot her license. So she had to go back home. Like, there's a lot of questions swirling around Jeff that I'd like to have answered.
Yeah.
Who knows if they will be.
Because I know you're always the type that's like, look at the spouse.
Well, I'm always the type.
It's not wrong to do. It makes sense. I get it.
Yeah, I'm the type where if there's any question around potential involvement, until they're ruled out with a serious alibi or with other evidence that, you know, concludes that they were not at all
directly involved,
then they're potentially involved.
Yeah, I totally get that. But I'm going to give you some more. So my whole thing is, if this is the case with, you know, the room and all the stuff, you know, that the kids are saying she supposedly wouldn't have brought with her, all of that. So then why are they so set on this fact that she couldn't have been there? I think, based on the items that were in the room, it seems to me like she could have been there. You seem to be of a little bit different of a mindset, but I guess one of the biggest sticking points was the fact that the clothes that Judy wore the day prior, like the ones that she had flown in from Boston to Philadelphia, were nowhere to be found in the hotel room. So either she wore the exact same clothes after she showered the morning that Jeff saw her on the 10th, or she took them with her. Or they were never there to begin with, which I think is what police might have been thinking.
I don't know. I mean, that room has a lot of answers in it. What kind of room was it? Was the bed made? Did it appear like two people slept in there? Jeff, what did you do in the morning? Did you brush your teeth? Did you shower? There's a lot of information that can be gathered from that room, which is why I think that female detective probably honed in on that, like, hey.
That's weird. That's not how I travel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, in terms of Judy's belongings, there was one question that I had, and that was, did they find Judy's suitcase? Which I think they did, and there obviously were women's clothes in the room. They said there was some stuff in the drawers, some dresses hanging up. And there was mention that Jeff apparently still had Judy's suitcase. Like when he had left Philadelphia to go back home to Massachusetts, he brought it with him. And he even mentioned like how he couldn't open it. He couldn't look through her stuff. It was too hard on him, all of this. But then that makes me wonder if authorities were thinking along the lines of like, did Jeff bring her stuff to Philadelphia and he like staged the hotel room, but she never actually showed up there? Again, like very Virginia Douglas vibes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking because they're not going there for an extended period of time, right? How long were they supposed to be staying there?
Like 2 days, 3 days.
2 days. So if she has her backpack that she goes everywhere with.
Yeah.
And they packed together.
Yep.
Say he probably has some type of briefcase or suitcase or something that he travels with like his work stuff in.
Yep.
That he's not going to check because he doesn't want to lose it.
Exactly.
Would they need more than one suitcase if they were traveling together?
Maybe not necessarily. Yeah, that's a good point.
One checked bag.
But the fact that he made mention that he still had her suitcase still packed up after he brought it home.
Well, I would want to know, yes.
Also, why wouldn't authorities take that? Is that not considered evidence in a missing persons investigation?
Well, if there's no crime at the time, I guess they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
But now other things I'd like to know. I don't know the process at the airport during these times. But how many bags did Jeff check?
Very good question.
If Judy took this later flight, again, these might be questions that we're left with, but if Judy took this later flight log of whether or not she was there, did she check a bag? What size was the bag? Would it have been a bag that had to be checked?
Yep.
These little types of things.
Or was it a carry-on and then she just took it off and she had like a backpack, obviously her Red Wonder, and her carry-on, and that's what she had in the hotel. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe that's also why, I don't know if flight regulations were the same back in 1997 regarding like liquids and stuff, but...
Definitely not.
Well, okay, so I was going to say like, yeah, maybe she didn't have like makeup and, you know, hair products and stuff like that because she couldn't put them in a carry-on versus a checked bag.
Yeah, perhaps.
So that was something that I, you know, kind of popped into my head too. But
that's something that we would know a lot more if we could understand what was going on with the flight process. And
agreed,
the airport process back in the day.
Yeah, definitely. Also, in terms of any sightings of Judy in Philadelphia, we had kind of talked about that before, but it seems like things were a little wishy-washy, especially with that lady that supposedly looked just like her. But someone labeled as a police source stated, quote, "We had only 2 people outside of Mr. Smith who say they saw her, and those 2 were kind of iffy," end quote. So what I'm curious about is how they can be kind of iffy. And I will say, just based on what I know and what I'm about to tell you, I don't necessarily agree with this statement because there are actually 2 sightings that I found that completely contradict the entire idea of Judy not being in Philadelphia. And I'm very curious, John, if you're going to agree with me.
All right, give them to me.
So, from what I can tell, authorities were able to confirm that Judy had, in fact, used her flight ticket. So if that were the case, how could she have not been in Philly? Regardless of if she didn't go to the hotel or whatever, no matter what, she used her ticket. And the woman who worked the front desk at the hotel specifically remembered seeing Judy the night of April 9th after she arrived at the DoubleTree after her flight. The desk clerk even commented on the flowers Judy had brought for Jeff. So that sighting alone right there seems super promising to me because the flowers are strange. And for the desk clerk to say this woman came in to give flowers to her husband, I think that's a pretty freaking good sighting if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree.
And there was also mention in the Philadelphia City paper that there was one additional person who attended and like sponsored this conference that also saw Judy there. There wasn't like too much elaboration on that whole thing, but yet again, that's another confirmed sighting of her in Philadelphia in the hotel.
Right. You would have to assume that if this company was flying people out for this conference, they'd all be staying at the DoubleTree.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I would think.
So you have multiple people that are seeing her there now. You answered a couple of my questions. You know, did anybody see her check in? And the fact that not only did they see her check in, but they were able to give this distinct descriptor of the flowers that they brought.
That's huge to me.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say she's there. Now what?
Okay. So even if none of the sightings of Judy after she'd gone missing were legit, the fact that they had these flight records, the fact that they have the front desk lady, the fact that they have all this other stuff, like it's shutting down the theory of her not being in Philadelphia in general. So I think we're on the same page. But at this point, even with investigators looking into the idea that Judy might never have been in Philadelphia, it appeared as though everyone, family, friends, authorities included, were still at a loss, and they couldn't even nail down what could have happened to Judy because, honestly, there were so many different scenarios that could have taken place. So if she's in Philadelphia, now we're under the impression, at least I am, and you are, outside of authorities, I guess, that she is in Philadelphia, then what the heck could have happened to her now? There's several options.
Oh, there's any number of options.
Well, I'll give you 5. Some common questions and theories that were being asked were, 1, could she have been abducted in the city? 2, could she have been killed? 3, did she commit suicide? 4, did she make the decision to vanish and leave her life behind willingly? Or 5, was it something else entirely?
So I'm sure we're going to work through these. Each one by one and either refute them or say, oh, okay, this is why it could have occurred. But number 4, right off the bat, that just seems outlandish because she had an opportunity to leave without ever flying into Philadelphia because Jeff left before her because she had the whole ID story going.
Yeah.
And she went home. So if she really wanted to run away, she could have thrown Jeff on the plane and then just went and left and did her own thing. So what are you laughing at?
I just can't wait to see your reactions. Like, I love hearing what you think right now about certain things. For me to tell you other stuff later that's going to make you probably like flip on your freaking head and be like, what was I thinking before? Or, oh my God, I was totally right on this. And this case is probably the most crazy case I have ever researched.
Hearing that and knowing that now, I want to know, how was Jeff and Judy's relationship?
All right, we'll get there. So
let's start going through 1 through 5.
Okay, so let's start with number 1 then, the option of a potential abduction. Her family was under the impression that there was no way she could have been abducted without making a scene. Remember, Judy was a strong, self-sufficient woman who could definitely handle herself. And taking Judy's personality into account, how would someone have gotten her into a vulnerable enough state to kidnap her? And then from there, even if someone was able to do so, could they have killed her after abducting her? Yet another confusing option that goes along with the abduction angle, because at this point, there hadn't been any sightings of her with anyone else, and her body was not located. Also, going along the lines of her body not being found, that kind of makes it seem like suicide would now be out of the question too, because if she'd done so, you would think that someone would have found her body by now, right?
You would assume so. I think with the abduction portion, that's something that is still like up in the air, because it's a big city. I'm not well versed in Philadelphia, but think of New York City.
Yep.
Think of how many people are, walking shoulder to shoulder through the city where something can happen and nobody even bats an eye.
Yeah, that's very true.
So I'm not totally convinced that abduction should be off the table.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a rogue taxi driver that abducted her.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
And maybe they, had child locks on the back doors, so they activated them and she couldn't escape, and they drove off wherever.
That just gave me such a memory back to the first episode of Criminal Minds. If anybody out there has seen it, they absolutely know what I'm talking about.
I don't, but I'll continue.
Okay, keep going.
So I think that that's still up in the air. You can't totally rule it out. Probably put it on the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
But the suicide portion...
Or murder, too. So murder can go along with the abduction theory.
Right, murder can go along with abduction.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe keep both of those on the back burner for now.
Okay.
And don't totally refute them.
Yep.
Now, with the suicide portion, I guess it depends on the means of committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
You have bridges, large bridges and structures in Philadelphia. Could she have gone walking, got onto this bridge, and jumped off?
Mm-hmm.
You would assume that somebody driving would have seen something and called the police if they saw somebody jump off a bridge.
I would frickin' hope, honestly.
Right, I would hope so. And I mean, that is one of the ways that somebody could commit suicide and a body not be located, because if you're jumping into a large body of water, and then say that's like a river, you're being brought out to potentially a larger body of water, maybe even the ocean. So, I don't know, the suicide portion's weird, because if you overdose, you take pills, you conduct any other means where, you kill yourself where you decided to do that.
Yeah.
You're going to be found.
Exactly. You can't move your body after you've ended your life. It's not
unless
possible.
you jump off a bridge into water and the water carries you somewhere.
Yes, exactly. I feel like that would be the only option.
Right, but somebody would probably see you jumping off the bridge.
But then you think back to cases like Brian Nisenfeld, and people think like
That's what I was gonna say.
Jumped off the bridge and then they didn't find him other than his foot.
Well, I was going to say, unless it was at night, and maybe it wasn't a heavily trafficked bridge at that point, or...
I mean, it was a Thursday night. It's not like it's the weekend, so maybe it wasn't as busy. So I can see what you're saying there.
Yeah, I just think that if Judy had committed suicide, it probably would have been because she had jumped off a bridge.
Mm-hmm. But also, why? Why would she want to commit suicide?
Right, so that brings me back to, like, if she had committed suicide, why would she have wanted to commit suicide? And why would she do it in Philadelphia?
Right, that doesn't make sense either. So it's kind of leaving us with your first thing that you said that you weren't totally on board with, which is, did she leave her life behind willingly? At first glance, that doesn't seem like a good option either. However, in that same article I've mentioned several times from the Philadelphia Inquirer, some very interesting things about Jeff and Judy's marriage was revealed.
Well, before you get into that, what was 5?
Something else entirely.
Oh, yes. Something else entirely. No.
Yeah, so
sure,
who knows?
It could always be something else entirely. But.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me about their relationship.
Okay, so basically what this is getting at is that supposedly the Smiths' marriage wasn't as wonderful as Jeff was making it out to be. And mind you, this is just what I would constitute as hearsay, and it's information given by friends of the couple. So always take comments like this with a grain of salt, as there isn't definitive proof, at least not any that was ever released publicly. But I don't think it's uncommon for people to divulge things to their friends that they might not to their families. So for all we know, this could be true, but again, just use a discerning eye or ear when listening to these few tidbits of info I'm about to give you.
Okay. One thing I had a question about was...
Sure.
So we know Craig and Amy were about 26, 28, roughly, around this
26
time?
and 24, yep.
26 and 24. How old was little Judy?
That I'm not sure about.
Okay.
I think roughly around the same age, but I am not positive.
Okay.
So we're going to jump in with a doozy. And that's that apparently Judy was asked to sign a prenup before her and Jeff got married. One of her friends told Mike Sokolov the following, quote, "And then, before the wedding, Jeff asked Judy to sign a prenuptial agreement, and Judy was not happy about that. Her way of protesting was that she finally signed it, but she refused to read it," end quote.
All right, I have a question now. Were there
Okay.
any large withdrawals from bank accounts before the trip?
Doesn't seem that way, no.
I was going to say, did Judy say, oh, I forgot my ID, go back home, let Jeff travel, then she hits up the bank, withdraws large sums of cash, or goes back to the house, maybe they had a safe, takes a bunch of property from there,
Yep.
and then makes her grand escape.
Yeah, very interesting theory, but I did not see anything about her taking any money out of their joint bank accounts.
Okay. And a side note, just for people that live around us, or that are from
In the New England or
the Rhode Island,
Northeast
Massachusetts,
region.
yes.
Yeah.
Sokolov. Jim Sokolov. Do you remember all the commercials
Oh,
about
I
Jim
do.
Sokolov?
I was like, I'm pretty positive I know how to say this guy's name, but let me just make sure. And I was like, yep,
Right.
I thought so.
Yeah, I just, every time you said that, I was like, Jim Sokolov. I remember those commercials when I was a kid.
Something attorney at law, right?
Right. Or D. Oliveira and Morgan.
D. Oliveira and Associates.
Well, it used
Once
to be.
it changed.
Right. Let's settle this one.
Oh my God, so funny. All right, so on top of the whole prenup thing, it appears as though, just based on things these friends said, that Judy might have been hesitant to get married in the first place, and she might not have been feeling totally confident in her decision. There was also mention that Jeff wanted Judy to take on additional responsibilities at home that she may not have wanted to, like taking on paying the bills, for example. But we also know that before she met Jeff, she was so used to being on her own and being independent, so I'm not entirely sure why something like this could have caused an issue in their relationship, unless it was something maybe they discussed up front that she didn't want to take part in. But we also can't forget how happy Judy seemed to be while she was single and living her own life, so all of this change definitely could have been difficult for her.
What happened to Jeff's first wife?
Not sure. I don't know.
So to me, it seems as though Jeff was trying to turn Judy into a housewife. Because, sure, we'll marry, you'll have, access to the finer things in life.
Yeah.
Because I'm a lawyer, a pharmaceutical lawyer.
Hey, she's a nurse. She was probably doing well.
But hear me out.
Okay.
Clearly has money if he's asking for a prenup.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And then he wants her to take on additional duties at home, like paying the bills and stuff like that.
Yep.
It seems like he wants to have, a wife assistant that can do all the stuff that he doesn't want to do at home. And by having her sign that prenup, it's like, yeah, you can have access to everything that I bring to this marriage, but when you decide to leave me, you can't take any of it with you.
Yeah.
So it seems like he was trying to cultivate some type of,
life that he wanted.
or almost like have a stranglehold on Judy's life. Because it's almost like you're taking this is a terrible term for it, but you're taking like this wild animal in a female that is well-traveled, likes to do her own thing, and trying to turn her into a house cat.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily if I agree with that, because she was still working, she was still traveling, she was still doing all the things that she wanted to do, but if anything, if I were to agree with what you're saying, I think it would be more along the lines of like this was him like starting this process, but I don't think there was any way that Judy was going to let her life go. So if anything, maybe he was trying to take little teeny tiny pieces here and there to mold what he wanted.
Maybe
but
that's why.
I don't know if I agree.
Okay. Maybe that's why she was like, I can't believe this asshole's making me sign a prenup, but I'm just going to sign it. I'm not even going to read it because I don't care. I was fine before him. I'll be fine after. I don't give a shit what the prenup says.
Yeah, it was probably more of like a slap in the face to be like, really? You think I would do that to you?
Right. You're the one that wants to marry me. She seemed apprehensive in marrying in the first place.
Yeah.
This is her third marriage. I'm sure she would have been fine just living her life. She's 50 years old. Or at the time they met, she was like, what, 40-ish years old?
Yep.
So.
Well, and then there was this other thing that was mentioned too that had to do with some of their other friends saying that Jeff was, quote, needy. So I don't really know what that means, but...
He wants a housewife.
Yeah, so I don't know.
He wants a housewife that bows down to him because he's like, oh, I'm going to sign this prenup. Again, you can have access to everything that I bring to this marriage, money, maybe a nice house, whatever, but you're going to do my bitch work. You're going to pay the bills. You're going to keep the house clean. You're going to do this for me. You're going to do that for me.
F that.
I know. I mean, but it seems like that's where I said, like, the whole, taking a wild animal and turning it into a house cat. It's like, no, this is not like the way she lived her life. It didn't seem that way anyway.
Yeah.
And then
maybe she wasn't thrilled
she saw the
that
world.
This is...
Maybe she saw the walls closing in around her, and she's like,
I don't want this. This is not what I'm looking for. I can't believe I got into this marriage. I can't believe this is what I'm doing with my life. And now it's only 5 months after they got married, and she's like, F this, I'm out.
Maybe he blew up at her when she got back to the hotel. If these sightings are correct, and she is verified to be at the DoubleTree in Philadelphia after forgetting her ID, he could have been pissed off about that whole thing. And then maybe they had a blow up that night.
Hey, maybe they had a blow up in Boston. At home, and that's why she forgot her ID, because she was like, oh, I would literally do anything to not sit on a flight with this guy right now. Like, maybe she just wanted some time to herself because
and she did
knew.
It on her own.
Yeah, so that could be a reason as to why the ID was left behind.
Yes. Now we know that there was trouble in paradise.
Allegedly. Because, of course, Jeff can say everything was fine. The friends can say everything was bad. You probably have to see in the middle of it to find the real truth.
Things weren't as
hunky-dory
as you may have imagined.
Yeah, and I don't think they ever are, because of course people are going to try and say like, oh, my relationship's perfect, or, there's no problems, there's no this, there's no that, especially if your wife is missing now. You're going to want to make it seem like it's great.
Right, you don't want to bring up the negatives about it, because then it puts the microscope over you.
Yes, exactly, but the microscope's going to be on you regardless, and that's the thing that you always say. It's like, tell the police what you know, the facts and the facts only. Do not leave anything out, do not elaborate, and that's it, and they can use their discerning eye to decide whatever it is that they're going to decide.
Right.
But there is one other big thing that could go along with her potentially wanting to leave her life behind. And it's reported that even some other friends had said that they believed Judy might have had cash stashed away separately from the bank. So she had like a nest egg just in case. So John, that's kind of along the lines of what you were just saying about her maybe going to the bank and taking out large sums of money, but what if she went back to Boston after and grabbed the cash that she had stashed away?
She could have purposefully left her ID at home to give her an out from the airport. She goes back, she grabs her go bag, which could have been the Red Wonder.
Yep.
And it had all this money in it, it had these supplies to run.
Yeah, so
had everything that she would need.
Yep.
And that's why her clothes that she wore on the airplane weren't at the hotel, because she probably just wore, like, you think about it, right? If you're planning to run or leave, you probably have, 2-3 changes of clothes. You wear it till it needs to be changed or needs to be washed.
Yeah.
She just threw it on again the next day and bolted.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I saw about that was, like, people were like, oh my God, why would you wear the same underwear? Like, people thought that would be weird because, like, that wasn't even included.
Maybe she went to commando.
I mean, yeah, who knows? You don't know her, whatever she does, but... I mean, I wouldn't use that as a huge sticking point, at least for me. But at the end of the day, like, I think her leaving her ID behind was strategic, if this is the case and all of this is true.
Right. If there were issues with the marriage, bumps in the road there, if friends are saying that she stashed money away, then this well-traveled lady, I know I keep saying it, but this well-traveled lady magically forgets her ID when she's going to fly over to Philadelphia. It's like, this seems like a whole setup that maybe she had schemed before, and it's like, okay, forget the ID, go pick up all my stuff, take my stuff, show up in Philadelphia. She's clearly pissed off at Jeff if she's going to be running away. If I show up in Philadelphia at the DoubleTree and he's the last person I'm seen with, now he's going to be wrapped up in this whole fucking investigation while I'm, taking my money and running.
Yeah.
She wouldn't leave any clothes behind that she had packed or that she had worn because
she's going to need them. Exactly. Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
I feel like some Gone Girl vibes here.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm about to upend everything.
Son of a bitch.
So the biggest thing that I've seen reported, and honestly, this is huge. I think it's huge. It's that no one, and I mean no one, not one single person in Judy's life, not even the friends who talked, kind of badly about Jeff and Judy's marriage, none of them believed that she would just up and leave her children behind like that. The three had a very special bond, and Judy loved her kids, and it just seemed out of the question that she'd leave them behind. Another friend of Judy's told Michael Sokolov, quote, being a single mother and having raised those kids alone and done such a good job, she wouldn't desert them. Judy's so outspoken that if she wanted out of her marriage, she would have just said that to Jeff. She wouldn't have done this, end quote.
Yeah, I was thinking back on that once you said you were going to upend this.
Yeah.
Is that, like, she was a single mom, and she took care of these kids for so long.
Yep. You have I feel like, not that I'm saying that parents don't have a strong bond with their kids, but when there's one parent, like...
They're the one that you rely on for everything.
Yeah,
there's only one.
They're
There's
your
no
mom
split.
and dad. They're everything.
Right.
So her son Craig also said, quote, because of the way our family was, with just my sister and me and my mom and her working a lot, communication was a big thing. The cardinal rule was, you can be late or you can change your plans, but always call or leave a note. We were a big note-leaving family. For her to do this to me and my sister, it would be so unlike her. It would be like a different person. I can see her wanting to do it, just take off, sure. But she would say, I'm leaving, goodbye, end quote.
Maybe she didn't want to leave any breadcrumbs. I mean, it still could have happened, you know, she's 50 years old. It could be a midlife crisis.
Well, so I was kind of thinking, like, after reading that, could it have been a psychological thing too, like we were talking about? You know,
not if she did all this planning.
But what if she didn't? What if she forgot the ID because whatever type of issue, you know, was coming on
just started
happening. Oh shit, it starts with just a forgotten ID, and then all of a sudden as she's out and about in this new city, she starts to lose her memory and she's completely confused and she's lost and she has no idea what's happening. And of course she's not going to call her kids. What if she forgot she had kids? You know what I mean? So like you can go 10 different ways with where this case can land.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like on the kids' behalf, you don't want her to have just left them high and dry.
Of course
They're
not.
adults now. They can live their own lives and stuff.
Yeah.
But you also want to think like, oh, you know, this is her third marriage. She had 2 other guys pretty much walk out on her. Now she wanted to leave on her own terms.
Yeah.
And to go with the whole Gone Girl vibe, it's like, oh, this guy's being an asshole to me. He's trying to make me his, you know, housewife. Well, I'm going to flip the script, and unfortunately, I have to cut ties with my kids in order to do so.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it for me this time.
Yeah.
And if you look at it from, like, the perspective of, you know, she's like a heroine of a story type thing. She's like, no, fuck this, I'm doing it.
Yeah, for herself.
That's like a good outcome of a story.
Yeah.
But this is real life, too, so it's like,
yeah, so
which way
it's
do you
hard.
go with
It's like,
this?
do you do that to your kids? Like, I feel like she, at least based on what I know, like, I just don't think she would. That's really hard to...
Unless she left behind some type of note or letter.
There's probably 150 unknown things here so far, and it's just so confusing. So, regardless of all of this and everything we've talked about so far, after a few months passed and authorities had more information under their belts, their theories seemed to be pretty much along the lines of one of 2 things. Either Judy chose to run off and began a new life away from Massachusetts, away from her husband, away from her life. Or something far more terrible had occurred. But which was it? Well, on September 7th, 1997, a hunter and his young son traveling through a remote area in Asheville, North Carolina, over 600 miles from where Judy was last seen, stumbled upon her skeletal remains. Investigators now knew one thing for certain. Judy Smith was dead. But how did she die? That question remained a mystery. We'll be back next week, where we'll be diving into the investigation into Judy's death and the theories surrounding her untimely passing. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.